this political argument about the role of science. And at least Cardinal Schönborn recognizes that work in cosmology can also be interesting. There's no, I would say that although, as shown by this statement, there is opposition to specific scientific ideas within Western Christianity, there's not really an opposition to the idea of science itself, only to some of its conclusions. I think this is different in the world of Islam. And it's really quite tragic because, as we know, Islam led the world in science in the 9th century at a time, the famous statement by Philip Hitti in his book about the Arabs that the caliphs Al-Mamun and Al-Rashid were delving into Greek philosophy and science at a time when Charlemagne and his nobles were struggling with the art of writing their names. Many of the scientists of this great period of Islamic science were rather non-religious. Some of them, like Razi's, actually hostile to religion, although some, I must say, like Al-Tuzi and Avicenna, were quite religious. But it was a mixed picture. But then there was a reaction against science in the Islamic world in the 12th century. And it was not a reaction so much against any one particular conclusion of science as against the very idea of laws of nature. Because it was felt that the laws of nature put God's hands in chains. This was particularly the view of an influential philosopher, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, who wrote a book, The Incoherence of the Philosophers. He rejected the idea of the laws of nature. He explained, for example, that if you put a piece of cotton in the fire and it turns black and smolders, it's not because of the heat, it's because God wants it to turn black and smolder. Everything is a special occasion for the will of God. Whether it was al-Ghazali's influence or whatever, or perhaps the depression due to military defeats in Spain, Islamic science really ended by the end of the 12th century. And today we have the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt that calls for an end of education in science. I had a dear friend, now no longer with us, Abdus Salam, a Pakistani, although like all scientists I know of Muslim origin who do significant work, he was educated and works in the West, not in Muslim countries. He tried for many years to get the oil-rich states of the Persian Gulf to invest in universities, including science education. And he found that they were quite open to the idea of technology, but tried to divorce it from fundamental science because they felt that fundamental science would pose problems for their religious faith. My feeling is they were probably right about that. Well, I've mentioned three areas of hostility that the laws of nature put God's hands in chains. They downgrade humans from the central, science downgrades humans from a central role, and it provides alternative explanations. But there's another one which may be the deepest area of conflict between science and religion, although I don't think it gets mentioned so often, and that is in the method of approach to truth. Religion largely relies on authority. It may be the authority of sacred texts, as in Sunni Islam and Protestant Christianity, or texts together with religious leaders who are divinely inspired to interpret them, like Shiite Islam and Roman Catholicism. We don't have anything like that in the world of science. And I want to make a clear distinction. We do have heroes. As scientists, we have enormous respect for. But they're not authorities to whom we go for solution of scientific problems. For example, in my field, certainly Einstein is the greatest hero of the 20th century. But no one today arguing about the theory of gravitation would settle the issue by referring back to Einstein's papers of 1915, 1916. Today, it's understood that any reasonably good graduate student understands general relativity better than Einstein did. We have learned, we have progressed, and so in science we don't have prophets. We have heroes, but not prophets. And I think that another difference in the approach to truth is that we try hard in science to stamp out the influence of wishful thinking, whereas so much of religious thought seems to be nothing else. I must believe in the afterlife because how could I face it if my life was going to terminate at death? The one thing that science cannot do, however, any more than religion can, is to justify itself. As David Hume understood long ago, you cannot use scientific arguments as a justification for science itself because that's circular. It's a moral choice between the methods of approaching truth of religion, the reverence for authority, the search for beliefs that will make us happy, and the more austere, self-reliant approach to truth of religion. For me, the moral choice is clear, but it is a moral choice and one that can't be, I think, argued about rationally. So what do we do about this conflict? There are those whose views about religion are not very different from my own, but who nevertheless feel that we should try to damp down the conflict, that we should compromise it. For example, Steve Gould, and he can correct me if I'm wrong because he's here, Larry Krauss, feel that it's most important to maintain the integrity of scientific teaching, and we should try to enlist the mainline religions who are often perfectly comfortable with teaching Darwinism, say, in school, as our allies, and not step on their toes by talking about a confrontation between science and religion. Ed Wilson, another dear friend, wants to enlist the mainline religious denominations as allies in the defense of the environment. I respect their views, and I understand their motives, and I don't condemn them, but I'm not having it. To me, the conflict between science and religion is more important than these issues of science education or even environmentalism. I think the world needs to wake up from its long nightmare of religious belief, and anything that we scientists can do to weaken the hold of religion should be done, and may in fact in the end be our greatest contribution to civilization. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Would you mind taking a
Sure.
chair? And since you invoked Lawrence Krauss, perhaps we'll bring him up. I just wanted to say a couple of things while you come ahead, Lawrence. It's fine. Lawrence Krauss is the director of the Center of Education, Research in Cosmology and Astrophysics at Case Western Reserve University, and has done a lot of communication of science. I just wanted to make a couple of points there. We'll get on to some of the religion stuff later. And the Islamic point, Steve, that we actually emailed on this, the whole notion of Al-Ghazali, who in some sense was responsible for the spread of fundamentalism in Islam, was in fact a Sufi. And there is now a great call in the Islamic community, as I read it, to point out that it's not just some monolithic faith, that in fact there's huge numbers of sects. And that what is required is for these various sects to go back to their original roots and start expressing themselves again and getting away from just the extreme fundamentalist position that's now taken control of it. And there was a column in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago by Nicholas Kristof,